we celebrate the sesquicentennial, or 250th anniversary of Universalism in the United States. Universalists have a lot to be proud of in that time, not least of which is that our faith remains strong and vibrant 2.5 centuries later, and our influence upon our society far outweighs our numbers. Though we are now meeting online in a very untraditional environment, one might assume from our beautiful edifice on Central Park West that Universalism has lofty origins. The truth is actually quite the opposite. Also, most people who are members, attendees, or even staff of Fourth Universalist Society tend to have been raised in other religious traditions, and that's true of Unitarian Universalism in general. What's interesting is that our origins in this land foretell some of the trends we continue to see in our religious movement today. And for that reason, I want to share with you one of the stories that make up our origin story, as it's been told to me and as I've read it in history books. So, in the mid 18th century, on the land that is now the Murray Grove Retreat Center, in an area that was then known as Good Luck in Ocean County, New Jersey, there lived a farmer named Thomas Potter, who was a member of a locally prominent family. Though uneducated, Potter was a successful and sincerely religious man, who some considered to be a mystic and prophet. Probably raised as a Quaker, who later joined the Baptists, he had heard rumors of a radical new theological idea called Universalism, the idea that all human beings will ultimately attain salvation. Based on his understanding of Scripture, as it had been read to him, he worked out his own strong beliefs. He sought out those with knowledge and with similar views, including visiting ministers, who he invited to his home to discuss and debate theology. In about 1760, after his wife Mary had grown weary of hosting such discussions in her home, Potter built a meeting house for the specific purpose of hosting a preacher of the Universalist persuasion. The original meeting house was built very much like a Quaker meeting house, with pews and no high pulpit, but rather a pulpit made of crude lumber and at a lower height, closer to the congregants. Despite his effort, for 10 years, he never found a Universalist preacher. However, he persevered in his faith that one day one would come along, despite his neighbor's skepticism. At the same time, in the British Isles, a young man with an intense interest in religion and a natural talent for public speaking was reaching a life crisis. Having first transferred from the Church of England to Methodism, John Murray had then been convinced by Universalist doctrines he had read of and heard in London. Losing his position in the Methodist Church as a result, and soon thereafter losing both his beloved infant son and his wife to illness, he was barely rescued from debtor's prison. Despondent and distressed, Murray was determined to give up the preaching of religion altogether and to make a new, quiet life for himself in America. Murray booked a ticket on a ship named Hand in Hand, which was bound for New York. Diverted first to Philadelphia, they were on their way back up the Jersey coast when they swept over a sandbar in a fog just off Cranberry Inlet into Barnegat Bay. The captain offloaded some of the cargo onto a smaller local vessel, which he asked Murray to oversee. The ship, now lighter and the wind having shifted, was able to return to the open ocean. But the wind changed again and the smaller boat was unable to follow. The Hand in Hand then proceeded on to New York, leaving Murray, the boat, the sailors, and the cargo behind, trapped in the bay. They came ashore, and when Murray went in search of provisions, he was directed to the Potter home. Thomas Potter, having seen the vessel stranded, met him and said spontaneously, I have longed to see you. I have been expecting you a long time. When Potter learned of Murray's background, he was convinced that this was the preacher of Universalism for whom he had been waiting, sent to him by Providence. Murray protested that preaching was now in his past, that he wanted nothing more to do with it. Besides, he had to leave as soon as the wind allowed his boat out of the bay. Potter responded, "The wind will never change, sir, until you have delivered to us in that meeting house a message from God." Finally, they agreed that if the boat were still stuck in the bay the following Sunday, Murray would preach in Potter's meeting house. If it were freed before then, Murray would depart with it. The ship was still there on Sunday. Murray did, in fact, preach a sermon on Universalism to Potter and his family and neighbors on September 30th, 1770. As soon as he was finished, a sailor ran up to inform him that the wind had turned, the ship was free, and they could now leave for New York. Murray departed, but soon returned to Good Luck and his friend Potter. Freshly inspired, he stayed in that area for several years, traveling around to the nearby towns and villages, preaching Universalism to enthusiastic listeners. He eventually left again, making his way to New England, earning ever greater popularity. He found a permanent home in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where he was the founder and minister to the Universalist Church there, the first in this country, and later in Boston. He was instrumental in the organization of Universalism as a denomination in 1793. At Potter's death, probably during the Revolutionary War, his will left the meeting house and the acre of land on which it sat to Murray, with the stipulation that the chapel should be open to all denominations for the worship of God. Murray was unable to claim it before his own death in 1815. It passed into the hands of a local Methodist congregation. The original building was taken down, and the current chapel was built on that site in 1841 and remains there to this day. It could be argued that nowhere in Universalist history are we given such a story of faith as that of Thomas Potter, an illiterate farmer who built a chapel in 1760 in the New Jersey woods for a yet-to-be-revealed Universalist preacher. Although some among us today may be skeptical of miracles, the meeting of John Murray, fleeing England to lose himself in the New World, and Thomas Potter, sure that God had sent this preacher of Universalism to give a sermon in his chapel, is about as close to a miracle as any one may read in the Bible. If the word miracle doesn't suit you, you might use the word serendipity instead, or even synchronicity to describe Potter and Murray's meeting. Synchronicity, as a term, was first coined by the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung to describe meaningful coincidental events that did not seem to follow the laws of cause and effect. Whether we consider ourselves mystics, or naturalists, or something else, many people can identify with experiencing an unexpected event which not only alters our trajectory, but which benefits it too. Whether it's a seemingly unexpected supernatural event, or just a person who does something or acts towards us in such a way that that person becomes like God's hands or heart in this world. Contemporary Unitarian Universalism recognizes these experiences as being one of the cornerstones of our faith. Our denomination's principles and purposes states that the living tradition which we share draws from many sources, including direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. We recognize the power of how that transcendent mystery worked in the lives of John Murray and Thomas Potter, just as we might identify with other aspects of their lives, like, for instance, Thomas Potter's patience, or how his own spouse didn't understand or appreciate his own spiritual enthusiasm, or with Potter and Murray both coming to Universalism from other religious perspectives or denominations, or with John Murray's trajectory as an immigrant to this land, or how even though he was a person of faith, Murray was still touched by illness and death to the point that he lost his faith, or how financial difficulties affected his personal life and vocation, or how an unexpected moment of synchronicity changed his life and that of his spiritual descendants forevermore. I myself appreciate how John Murray's vocational trajectory didn't appear to be linear because I know that my own vocational life didn't follow a straight path, and for many years I personally had lacked the opportunity to exercise my ordained ministry until I came to this congregation in 2016, and your welcoming and open spirit means more to me than any of you can imagine. As 21st century Universalists, we can learn from our past to build our future, and I can only imagine what future generations will write about us in another 250 years when Universalists celebrate the quincentennial of Murray's sermon in Potter's Chapel. If we continue to remain open to the forces which create and sustain life and uphold our values of love, justice, and hope, I know it'll be a rich legacy indeed. Thank you.